A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Seek refuge with God from Satan, the rejected name of God, most gracious, most merciful. The birth of Mary. God has chosen Adam, Noah, the family of Adam, and the family of Amram as messengers to the people. They belonged in the same progeny. God is here omniscient. The wife of Amram said, "My Lord, I have dedicated the baby in my belly to you, totally, so accept from me. You are hearer, omniscient." When she gave birth to her, she said, "My Lord, I have given birth to a girl." God was fully aware of what she bore. The male is not the same as the female. I have named her Mary, and I invoke your protection for her and her descendants from the rejected devil. Her Lord accepted her a gracious acceptance and brought her up a gracious upbringing. Under the guardianship of Zechariah, whenever Zechariah entered her sanctuary, he found provisions with her. He would ask, "Mary, where did you get this from?" She would say, "It is from God. God provides for whomever he chooses, without limits." The birth of John. That is when Zechariah implored his Lord, "My Lord, grant me such a good child. You are the hearer of the prayers." The angels called him when he was praying in the sanctuary. God gives you good news of John, a believer in the word of God, honorable, moral, and a righteous prophet. He said, "How can I have a boy when I am so old and my wife is sterile?" He said, God does whatever he wills. He said, "My Lord, give me a sign." He said, "Your sign is that you will not speak to the people for 3 days, except through signals. Commemorate your Lord frequently and meditate night and day." Assalamu alaikum, everybody. We just read the Quran. The Quran study just started a couple minutes ago. We read from chapter 3, verse 33, all the way to 41. I put it in VC1-chat for anyone that wants to check along with that. And now we're opening for any questions or comments regarding these verses. So, my first point was regarding chapter 3, verse 33. This is interesting that God has chosen Adam, Noah, the family of Abraham, and the family of Amram as messengers to people. So if I understand this correctly, Adam would be a messenger, right? Noah would be a messenger. The family of Abraham would actually be a package of messengers, because we know Noah's son was not a messenger, right? So family of Abraham would be a package of messengers because it's Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and of course Ismail. At a minimum, all those guys were messengers. Then it says the family of Amram, which I would understand to be Moses and Aaron. And then it says but then I'm kind of confused, because then in 35 it says the wife of Amram said, "My Lord, I've dedicated the baby in my belly to you, so totally, so accept from me." So I'm not sure about that one actually. Who is the family of Amram? But if anyone has any information on that, that'll be great. Thank you.
I mean, wasn't it Zachariah alayhi salam, whose wife dedicated her child to?
Well, Zachariah, no, because that's Mary's mother, right? So it says wife of Amram. So we know the wife of Amram is Mary's mother. So then Mary's mother gave birth to Mary, and then Zachariah was chosen as a guardian for Mary.
I think
So
that's from David and Solomon. They're like, that's the Amramites.
So I always understood that Amram was Moses and Aaron.
No, they're the ones that are related to Jesus eventually. Because Jesus would say it like it's in the New Testament. He'll according to he's basically saying that I'm the offspring and the descendant of David.
Well,
And
because in the
and God sent an angel in the form of a man, and I think that was David.
so
They're all. That's what that's
yeah
what the Bible is saying, that Jesus is affirming to let people know that I'm not God or anything.
the,
This is who I belong to. This is my family tree, and he says I'm an offspring and the descendant of David, and those are the Amramites. Like even John, John was before Jesus, and then Jesus came
yeah.
after him.
So
So
so the connections I'm
that
making
family
here.
tree.
So the connection I'm making here is, first of all, in the Bible, Amram is the father of Moses. So Moses and Aaron were brothers, Amram being their father. Then in the Quran it says, Mary is told, "O descendant of Aaron." If she's descendant of Aaron, then that means she's included and related to Moses and Aaron, right? So then the only other thing is that would mean her father was also Amram. So that would mean there's two Amrams, and maybe they had the same lineage and the same last name, I guess, a family
Wait, say
name.
that
Yeah.
again?
That's a tribe, though. Amram, I think. There's a
Right,
tribe of people.
right. But when it says wife of Amram, it's talking about a specific person. But that's Mary's father was Amram, right?
Well, in the
And
Quranic account, unless I'm mistaken, in which case someone correct me, Mary's father was Zachariah.
no,
Mm.
no.
In the
Zachariah
Quranic account,
was the guardian of Mary. So this is the whole premise. When Mary's mother said, "I dedicate this baby to God," that entailed is basically, this is the concept where Nazarene comes in. These are individuals who, in essence, they're dedicated to the worship of God. So they usually reside and live in the with the priest. Priest at that time was Zachariah. So when she says the male is not the same as the female, is that she still fulfilled her vow, but rather than expecting it to be a Nazarene, it basically Mary was given to the I don't want to say church, but I can't think of a better, the congregation in essence, to be serving God in that vicinity. Then we see that Zechariah implored. So in Surah 19 and Surah 3, he implored for such a good child like Mary, and then God blessed Zechariah with Yahya, John. So there was no blood relationship between the two, but yeah, they Zachariah was the guardian when Mary was basically how do you put it, dedicated to the cause of God.
Mashallah, I want to add. So here, yes, we have two Amrams. The one is the father of Moses and Aaron, like you said, Navid. And yes, Moses and Aaron, they're family and they're messengers. But this Amram, the father of Mary, is also has a family of messengers, because the family of Amram didn't just produce Jesus as a messenger, but also John the Baptist. It's actually right beneath here in these verses. John, the birth of John. These two, Jesus and John, are actually familially related through Amram. John is a descendant from the sister of Mary.
Right. So there's two Amrams, Moses and Aaron's father, and then Mary's father. They're both Amram, correct?
Yeah,
Correct.
that's correct.
Yeah,
And the verse that
the delta between that is like thousands of years, though. So
yeah. Is it really
think
thousands? I would say even maybe 1,000 or even less than 1,000, right?
it's estimated to be 1400, between 1400 and 1200.
Okay. So then the next verse I wanted to refer to is 1928, which is almost universally mistranslated as sister of Aaron. And this is why the critics of the Quran believe that one reason why they believe the Quran is wrong, they think Muhammad got confused. They think that he's confusing the sister of Moses, and which her name was Miriam, with Miriam in the mother of Jesus. But then Mustafa here, he's saying that the word, and so the reason they get it wrong is because the word for it's yachtu, or yachta, right? That word can mean descendant, but also can mean sister. It's from the root aleph fa waw, and so Mustafa is claiming that it doesn't mean this, but it does mean this, can mean this, and in this
It
instance, it
does.
does.
So I pasted a verse in 738. When you say like the sister, so say for instance, you know how we have this expression in English, we say, oh, this is their sister school, right? Not that they're literal sister. It's that okay, there's a connection here. This same thing happens in Arabic when we see let me find the word, but yeah, where is it? So in 738, it says, he will say, enter the previous community of jinns and humans into hell. Every time a group enters, they will curse their ancestral group. If you look here, it's the same thing, ikhtaha. So it's like, it says they curse their sister would be if you read it literal. But it shows that this expression of ikhta, it basically can mean an ancestral group, or it can mean your literal sister. It depends. And we have the
Right.
same thing in English and in Arabic. We say brethren, right? We say, oh, your brother, Hud, your brother Saleh, right? It's not that he's his literal brother. He's from the same progeny as the group.
It's also interesting to note that Mary is also called the descendant of Aaron in the Gospels. In the same way.
It's funny. It's you know, the Quran intentionally it puts these things for someone who wants to try to find fault in it.
Yeah,
Gives them
someone
excuses.
like Mustafa. Okay. And then Ahmed wrote, well, most Arabs I've asked said no, to be honest. And the kind of idea is it doesn't matter what, some Arab speakers today think or say. It's irrelevant. We can use the Quran and we can use historical information. But of course, we have a messenger of the covenant who clarified this for us above all. So anyway, does anyone have any, we read the verses for everyone that joined. We read the verses 33, from 333 to 41. Does anyone have any questions about these verses or any comments? I had a comment on 38. It says, "You hear of your prayers." I think this is a similar, if not identical, statement to what we say in the Salah when we say Sami Allahu liman hamida. It's pretty much the same concept and very similar statement.
There is a real controversial expression in these verses. I'm a little apprehensive to bring up, but it says the male is not the same as the female. Today, if you make that proclamation, you can get canceled and lose your job. It's a pretty edgy stuff in there.
Yeah, that's in verse 36. It says, "My Lord, I have given birth to a girl. God was fully aware of what she bore. The male is not the same as a female. I have named her Mary, and I invoke your protection for her and her descendants from the rejected devil." Okay. Next question I had is about the signs. What do you guys think about the signs in 341?
Yeah, if I understand correctly, and the way it's also portrayed in the gospel is the fact that he simply couldn't speak.
Yeah. It doesn't say don't speak. It says you will not speak. Basically, and the way I understand this is, when you say I'm at a loss for words, it's kind of the same thing. Like this guy's in such a state of awe and amazement that whatchamacallit, he's incapable of speaking outside of just glorifying God and signaling with signs. We take for granted. Oh, good.
No, go ahead. I was just gonna ask, how do you guys think that Mary got the food here?
Good question. I'll just wrap up this point. Is when you experience something profound, it's life changing. It's life altering, and it's a blessing that it has that level of impact because it creates almost like a physiological change in the person where they're no longer the same person they were after the fact as they were before the fact. You see that same thing with John, that God put this inspiration inside him, of this confirmation that his God's promise is true, that it was life changing to the point where again he became incapable of speaking to the people. I don't know if you guys ever had an experience like that where it's just like um, so jarring that it's like who you are after that event is just so fundamentally different than who you were before.
Okay,
No,
I got the next batch. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say something quickly about 36. It says she gave birth to her. She said, "My Lord, I have given birth to a girl." Then it says God was fully aware of what she bore. That seemed like a strange thing to have that put there. That God would say right afterwards, God was fully aware of what she bore. Why do you think that's there?
To me, it's a kind of an assurance in the sense where these things catch us by surprise, right? She was, whatever reason, she had it in her mind that she's going to have a boy. She's going to dedicate it to the to God as a Nazarene, and then to her amazement, oh, it's a girl. But the aspect is this wasn't outside of God's plan. This wasn't outside of what God willed. A lot of times in our lives we think that we look at the perfection in God's creation for the universe, the planet Earth, all these the considerations that God put in this perfect balance. Then when it comes to the events in our own life, there's that element of us being caught off guard. And it's almost like we have this moment of, oh, did God forget? Did He not account for this? And I think for me, when I read it, I see that as an assurance that yeah, something might happen. You might lose your job tomorrow. Some event might not transpire as you anticipated. While that might be a shock to you, it's not a shock to God. I think a clear example of this is interesting in the story of Joseph is that when his brothers abandoned him, left him into the well for dead, God says He established Joseph. You wouldn't think that being in the well left for dead, about to being sold into slavery, was when you're going to be established on this earth. That was the key event that was necessary that propelled him on this journey, where it took him to be, the highest ranking children of Israel in all of Egypt, to be able to save his family from famine. Like this was the path, the course that God has instituted for him. From an outside perspective, it seems like, oh man, like did God forget to account for this? How is this guy going to be anything noteworthy at this point? You would think that the his chances have been removed. It's the same thing. Like you say, okay, what especially the sentiment at that time towards baby girls. Oh, they're not going to be able to be as righteous. They're not going to be able to have the same potential as a boy. God, in essence, is saying, that's not the case.
Okay. Do we have a volunteer to read the next batch of verses? Does someone want to come up and just read these verses? I loaded them in VC1-chat. We're reading from chapter 3, verse 42 to 51. Someone want to read the verses?
Is it okay if I could?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay. Mary and Jesus. The angel said, "O Mary, God has chosen you and purified you. He has chosen you from all the women." This is news from the past that we reveal to you. You were not there when they drew their raffles to select Mary's guardian. You were not present when they argued with one another. The angel said, O Mary, God gives you good news, a word from him whose name is the Messiah, Jesus, the Son of Mary. He will be prominent in this life and in the hereafter, and one of those closest to me. He will speak to the people from the crib, as well as an adult. He will be one of the righteous. She said, My Lord, how can I have a son when no man has touched me? He said, God thus creates whatever he wills. To have anything done, he simply says to it be, and it is. He will teach him the scripture, wisdom, the Torah, and the gospel. As a messenger to the children of Israel, I come to you with a sign from your Lord. I create for you from clay the shape of a bird. Then I blow into it, and it becomes a live bird by God's leave. I restore vision to the blind, heal the leprous, and I revive the dead by God's leave. I can tell you what you eat and what you store in your homes. This should be proof for you if you are believers. I confirm previous scripture, the Torah, and I revoke certain prohibitions imposed upon you. I come to you with sufficient proof from your Lord. Therefore you shall observe God and obey me. God is my Lord and your Lord. You shall worship him alone. This is the right path. And footnote for chapter 3, verse 51. This is precisely what Jesus is quoted to say throughout the New Testament. See, for example, the Gospel of John, chapter 20, verse 17, and the book Jesus, Myths and Message by Lisa Spray, C8, chapter 4, Universal Unity Fremont, California, 1992. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we just read the verses from 342 to 351. This talks about Mary and Jesus, and just some of the aspects of the stuff that's going on. Did anyone have any questions or comments about the verses that were read?
I think you guys forgot to read John 20:17.
Oh, okay. That's a good point. I loaded it too. But John 20:17 says, Jesus said to her, Stop holding on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brothers and tell them, I am going to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. Okay? Let's see here. Okay, did anyone have any comments about the verses we read?
Yeah, I think that when Christians read this verse, they must have like some crazy amount of cognitive dissonance. There's like, because they're saying that it's one God, but Jesus calls the Father God. So is that two gods? No, it's one God. And just must be very mentally frustrating, to be honest.
What's interesting is we don't have any of or in the four Gospels that are in the Bible today. It doesn't discuss the birth of Jesus in the sense of his communication, his talking in the crib. This stuff is kind of left out. But what's interesting is there's in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Proto-Gospel of James. It actually discusses this entire process of Mary's mother and father and the having of Mary, this putting in the guardianship of Zachariah. And what's interesting is this verse where it says, you were not there when, let me see if I can find it, when they argued over, where is that? The raffle. Just read it. Yeah, so 44. This news from the past that we revealed to you. You were not there when they drew the raffles to select Mary's guardian. You were not present when they argued with one another. And then the question is, was this arguing because they wanted to be Mary's guardian or they didn't want to be Mary's guardian. I'm curious what you guys think.
I think that they wanted to because she was she had provisions from God. I mean, she was provided for somewhere constantly, and I guess that's why they wanted to be her guardian.
But they didn't know. They didn't know about this till after, right?
Yeah, the provisions were there when she was already under Zechariah.
Yeah.
So this is how it's described in the proto gospels of James. Was that in essence, okay? So you consider you have this young girl who, in essence, when they say the guardianship, people were concerned that they're going to think that they're having relations with this, young woman. So no one wanted the responsibility, because this was kind of one of these things that was unprecedented, was that there was a woman was the one who was put under the guardianship of Zechariah, and then was to basically, we have in the Bible that eventually became the wife of Joseph. But during this whole ordeal, she was still chaste, and the concern was the fact of you have this child living in your home. And then, you think about how much of a bigger deal that is when she shows up and she's pregnant. People are going to assume, the worst. And this is kind of at least what it describes. And it makes sense to me that when they were arguing, it wasn't because they wanted Mary to be guardian. They actually didn't want to be Mary's guardian. And there's a theme that's taken place in these this incident.
That was after, like, she wasn't. It was before they even got to her. I mean, she wasn't pregnant when they had this argument.
No, I'm saying
she
that
became. She was under Zechariah, not after she got pregnant. She was under Zechariah before then.
The precedent of having this virgin girl in your home, and then the concern was the fact that people are going to speculate there's relationships. Then when she actually does end up pregnant, it's one of those things where you realize like the gravity of the situation. What I was getting at, though, is the significance here is we have a verse, and I believe it's Surah 19, where Mary said when this took place, that she had the pregnancy, she says, "I wish I was dead and long forgotten." In this incident, you have, in essence, people who are saying, look, I don't want anything to do with this girl. I don't want to be her guardian. And the whole thing is that some of the biggest blessings we have in this world, in all of human history, in essence, when they took place, people had the most repulsive attitude towards it. And it's not until after the fact that you realize just how tremendous of an act this is, how huge of an impact this is, how big of a blessing this is. I see this as an example, like of things that happen in our own lives. Some of the stuff that seems so horrendous, that we say, oh, I wish I was dead, I wish I was long forgotten, I wish this never took place, are actually those times in our life when we, God willing, are going to reflect back and realize that those were the biggest pivotal points in our life that really set our trajectory.
I wanted to refer to a verse that we read. 349 says, as a messenger to the children of Israel, I come to you with a sign from your Lord. I create for you from clay the shape of a bird, then I blow into it and it becomes a live bird by God's leave. And then it goes on about restoring vision, and it goes on about healing the lepers and reviving the dead. I give the link to the infancy gospel of Thomas. This is what was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, I think about 100 years ago. And then I put an image in the VC1- chat. This is from the 14th century, where it actually depicts Jesus kind of making live birds out of clay. This is the kind of a drawing. What's interesting, that's the 14th century, and the infancy gospels was found about 100 years ago. So this concept was already known. And so I don't know necessarily that they were relying on the Quran, and it's possible, very likely, that they actually knew about this from the kind of historical depiction of Jesus. This is further evidence and corroboration for the Quran as the word of God.
Yeah, I
it's
don't.
only recently
think that
discovered.
I think the whole thing with Mary, like, I mean, I think that they wanted to be her because she had provisions. They walked into her sanctuary and they saw her with provisions, and then after that, they trying to argue about who's gonna give her sanctuary about the guardianship. It was not after. Let me see, because like the birth of Mary, like the mother of Mary was the one. She was the one who was praying for a good child or whatever, and then she bore Mary. You know what I mean? She came. So Mary was a blessed child by God. Like, I'm sure the people that was surrounding Mary's mother would have known this as well, because she was part of the Amramit family. You know, and then when they walked into her sanctuary, they saw her, you know, being provided for, and they didn't know where she told them that God gave her the provision. For them, that's probably wasn't something weird, because they were all already worshiping God and knowing the powers of God, and they knew that Mary was blessed by God. So I doubt that they were trying not to be her guardian. I doubt it was the opposite, because like with her provision being provided by God like that, they will all be provided like that. That's why they had to draw a raffle. So I don't think so. And then, like, when she did say those things about when she got pregnant with Jesus, like how because she didn't, God gave her strength. God gave her information used against he like actually against I think, I don't know, her guardian. Because she said the mother wasn't chaste. You know what I mean? So I don't think that people were like against her and against the family at all. I think it was the opposite. I think they all thought that Mary was a blessing to have in their sanctuary. And then, like, nobody had a chance to really say anything to her. They tried to say something, but she came in, her immediate response silenced them all. And she, because God gave her the information she needed to be able to protect herself. So, I don't know. I don't agree that they were trying to avoid her.
Okay. Anyone have any other questions or comments about the verses we read?
Yeah, by the way, the proto gospels and the infancy gospels, they were not found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls are actually Old Testament stuff. You guys confuse that, dude.
That is correct.
Yeah, the Dead Sea Scrolls had Old Testament stuff. Yeah, the proto gospels were like scattered around, like found.
Some of them are dated before Gospel of Mark, even like early as that, and some of them are after.
So
But
I
this
just
is
looked at
scattered
it.
stuff.
It says 40% of the copies are texts from the Hebrew scriptures, 30% are from the Second Temple period, which were not canonized in the Hebrew Bible. Book of Enoch, Jubilees, Tobit, Sirach, and Psalms, 152 to 155. And the remainder, 30%, are sectarian manuscripts of a particular group. Okay, Judaism, okay, etc., etc. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
it's
the
all
Dead Scrolls date back to 2nd century BC, right? So
yeah, somewhere around like 2nd century or 3rd century BC to like 80 AD. But the point is that the Dead Sea Scrolls only had Old Testament stuff.
So I'm pasting this is from the Proto Gospel of James. It So it says, so it's talking about the raffle. It says, and Joseph, throwing away his axe, went out to meet them. And when they had assembled, they went away to the high priest, taking with them their rods. So this is kind of like again their raffle. And he, taking the rods of all of them, entered into the temple and prayed. And having ended his prayer, he took the rods and came out and gave them to them. But there was no sign of them. And Joseph took his rod last, and behold, the dove came out of the rod and flew upon Joseph's head. And the priest said to Joseph, you have been chosen by lot to take into your keeping the virgin of the Lord. But Joseph refused, saying, I have children, I am an old man, and she is a young girl. I'm afraid lest I become a laughing stock to the sons of Israel. And the priest said to Joseph, fear the Lord your God, and remember what the Lord did to Dathan and Abiram and Korah, Numbers, and how the earth opened, and they were swallowed up on account of their contradiction. And now fear, O Joseph, lest the same thing happens in your house. Joseph was afraid and took her into his keeping. And Joseph said to Mary, behold, I have received you from the temple of the Lord, and now I leave you in my house and go away to build my buildings, and I shall come to you. The Lord will protect you.
Yeah, but that's not accurate story. The accurate story is what's in the Quran. We can't go by that.
I don't see this as a contradiction to the Quran.
Yeah, it is, because it's got nothing to do with Zechariah.
That does.
No, it doesn't. It's nothing to do with Zechariah's time. Like that, that is complete inaccuracies compared to the Quran. That's after, like, they saying that she needed to get married to somebody, but that's not true. She didn't need to. Even the birth of Jesus in the Bible is incorrect. The Quran is correcting it. The Quran is correcting the order of everything when it comes to Mary. So why read the Bible for accuracy now? I don't understand. When they said that they walked into her sanctuary, they saw her with things like she was blessed by God. She was a blessing from God. That's what that whole segment is. Like, her mother was praying that the baby in her belly would be blessed by God. And she said she was confused when she bore a daughter, and God says, I know what you bore. Because he knew that Mary was going to give birth to Jesus. You know what I mean? And then when Mary came out, she was a very blessed child. She was gifted by God with provisions. The Bible is not the Bible is inaccurate here. Like the whole story of Jesus, like, I mean, I grew up with that constant like storyline, and it's incorrect.
That's fine. I don't think you've read the Proto Gospel of James. I disagree.
Yeah, I think I have. I think I've been a Christian. I was a Christian from birth to like 20, something like 18.
Doesn't mean that. But again, I don't see this as a deviation when it says that they argued over the
nothing to do with Ralph. Yeah, it is a
deviation.
They were arguing because they wanted her. Because that's the thing, is you're making the conclusion that they wanted her. I'm saying they didn't. And I'm showing evidence to show that.
I said that the raffle with Zechariah wasn't after she was pregnant. It was before she got pregnant.
Exactly.
It was when she was a child.
No one's saying it's after. That's something you're making up right now.
No, it's something something is in the Quran.
So what verse are you referring to for your claim? Which verse are you referring to?
Asking me? I mean,
I'm asking Anne. No, I'm asking Anne. Anne, what verse are you referring to? Okay. All right, everybody that joined, we've been reading the Quran. We're in chapter 3. We read from chapter 3, I think 33, all the way to chapter 50 to verse 51. So 333 to 351. In 351, we talked about what Jesus says. I want to say something interesting about 350. It says, I confirm previous scripture, the Torah, and I revoke certain prohibitions imposed upon you. So this is interesting because he doesn't revoke all prohibitions. And you see a lot of Christians, they'll just say, Jesus got rid of the Old Testament. It's all done. But here it's saying, I revoke certain prohibitions on you. And this is consistent with the Quran. It says, I revoke certain prohibitions imposed upon you. I come to you with sufficient proof from your Lord, therefore you shall observe God and obey me. Does anyone have any comments or questions on that?
I just wanted to ask, this Quran study is being recorded, right? So we can watch it later, or?
Inshallah, yeah,
Alright, thanks.
no problem. The next thing is, I'm actually curious if anyone knows of any biblical or New Testament account is in regards to where is it? Oh, in 349 he says, I can tell you what you eat and what you store in your homes. Does anyone know of any reference to that in the New
Well,
Testament?
there's a parallel. Yeah, Jesus, there is a thing in the gospel about Jesus knowing what's in the homes and all this. I can get the reference. It's not an exact parallel, but it's something to that sort of Jesus being given knowledge of what's in people's homes. That's in the gospels. I'll pull it up, inshallah. I just need a second.
I put the verses on the VC chat. You guys can read it. Those two that I go by regarding Mary.
What did you put it? Which VC chat?
VC chat 1.
I didn't get any. Oh, okay, yeah. You put it in. Okay. I got it. So she put 36 and 37. It says, when she gave birth to her, she said, my Lord, I have given birth to a girl. God was fully aware of what she bore. The male is not the same as the female. I have named her Mary, and I invoke your protection for her and her descendants from rejected devil. Her Lord accepted her a gracious acceptance and brought her up a gracious upbringing under the guardianship of Zechariah. Whenever Zechariah entered her sanctuary, he found provisions with her. He would ask Mary, where did you get this from? She would say, it's from God. God provides for whoever he chooses without limits. So what is the point you're trying to make with these two verses?
One is the first one is her mother had prayed for the blessed child. Okay, right?
Yeah.
And the second one is confirming that she was a blessed child. So it
Well,
wasn't like
what's
she hadn't given birth to Jesus yet. You understand? She
I
hasn't.
understand, but what's your point? I don't get your
Yeah,
point.
but he was trying to compare it to after she got pregnant, and then when they were trying to get her married to somebody named Joseph. But like that's also an inaccuracy, the Joseph situation. She wasn't married during the time she gave birth. She didn't, like, even the New Testament. What they were trying to say is that they try to go to Jerusalem, and that she was that's how she gave birth to the baby. That's why, like, if you follow like the storyline according to the Christians, they are saying that her and Joseph had to go and do their taxes or get counted or something in Jerusalem, and then they got caught outside, and then somebody invited them in, and that she gave birth to Jesus in a stable, which we know the Quran is saying the opposite of that.
So
You know what I'm
does
saying?
anyone, hold on a second, let me ask, does anyone here believe that Jesus was born in a stable?
I'm not saying anybody there believes it, but that's what the Bible and the Christians believe. That's the whole story about storyline. So it's
I know, but this is not
whether we believe it or not.
but this is not a Christian like group.
But what I'm saying, he's reading this stuff out of the Bible and comparing it to the Quran and saying
Well,
that
no,
that they
what
didn't
Peter
like
was
her.
quoting, Peter wasn't quoting the Gospels. He was quoting the proto texts. That's not what the Christians believe.
Yeah, they do believe that she was married to Joseph.
No,
They
I
believe
understand. I
that.
understand. But what Peter was quoting, he was quoting from non-Christian texts.
Nothing in the proto gospels references the stable.
But I'm saying that what we have in the Quran is what the story is, and God says that's it. There's nothing else to be read regarding Jesus. It's in the Quran. So
Can
if
you
we go
guys
outside of the Quran to look for information regarding Jesus, we're doing the wrong thing because God says this is it.
do you guys remember the one verse where it was talking about how Mary was given to Zechariah and how they were chosen and they argued? Like, do you guys remember that verse? Can someone put that here from the Quran?
Yeah, we just read it. It was
Which verse was that?
340.
We're talking about the raffle.
Yeah, 344. Yeah, 344. I'll put it back.
Because that verse seems to confirm the proto-gospel segment.
Mhm.
Yeah, I just don't know. I don't understand Anne's position because
I
Rashad.
strongly
Rashad.
disagree. I think
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think
but
one
hold
needs
on a
to have
second,
her in the
Anne.
house. The other way
And
around.
your position is very, I'm sorry to say it, to me it seems kind of inconsistent because the messenger of the covenant repeatedly referred to the Bible, even told us to read stories in the Bible that corroborate with the Quran. You're telling us we shouldn't do that. So I think I need
Bible
to
saying
trust
itself
I
regarding the story of the Quran is saying that the stories was in the Quran about Jesus. That's it.
I understand, but we have examples, for example, with regard to the heifer. Rashad tells us to go to the Bible to read the more details about the story of the heifer. You're saying don't do it. So should I trust you or should I trust Rashad? And I can give a really good example of this is in chapter 2, verse 67. Let's see what he
Actually,
says.
they have the whole. They wrote a whole book about the problems regarding Jesus. Because they're saying the missing gospels of Jesus. So and the Quran is confirming it by saying like after we read the story, you know, when God says be and it is or whatever, and when he the whole his I'm gonna get the verse for you guys where God says that regarding Jesus, this Quran is it.
Okay, yeah, I want to see that verse.
Are you talking about Surah Maryam,
good.
where it says ذلك قول الحق about Isa, I think. Chapter 19.
Yeah, it says this is the truth about Jesus, right?
Yeah, it doesn't say this is the only thing about Jesus. It says this is the truth about Jesus, that's all. I think that if that's the verse that
Is
he's
it talking about
quoting,
the
that's
identity
the
of
one.
Jesus? It says this is the truth about Jesus, which they continue to dispute. Is that what we're referring to?
Oh wow, we already have an answer to it because it seems to be answering a dispute.
Right. We're not arguing about that though.
Yeah, I'm not saying like the Quran's method is like confirmation, correction, and solving disputes, right?
Exactly. I think that's 1937. If I can bring that verse in regards to what you guys are saying. Oh, is that one? No. Yeah. It says that was the proven truth. Is that the one?
I put 34. It says that was Jesus, the son of Mary, and this is the truth of this matter about which they continue to doubt.
Yeah, that's the chapter 19, right? Is that the one?
Yeah, 34. Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't say this
Okay.
is the only correct information, but it just says this is the truth that they dispute. That's all.
Yeah, there can be more information elsewhere. And I just give the example. For example, it says see also the Bible's book of Numbers, chapter 19. If you want to know more about the story of the heifer situation. Also in 527, we talk about the first murder. And in the first murder, we know that the names of the two sons is irrelevant. And it's not in the Quran, right? Abel and Cain. But they're given in the Bible as Abel and Cain. And that's in Genesis 4, 2 through 9. So I don't think we should just, the Bible, we shouldn't just treat it like the Hadith. We don't just trash it. I mean, it can have even the Hadith, it can have some historical information for us. But especially the Bible, I think nothing wrong with examining it for this kind of purpose. Anyway,
well, I think there's important distinction as well. Just last thing, important distinction between the Hadith and the Bible. Right, one of them is a book confirmed by God, and then there might be alterations in it. The other one is actually like separate, whole other separate sources that are not even talked about in the Quran. Right, that's a big difference.
Mashallah, yeah, that's a good point. The hadith, like most hadith are false, but certain hadith are like historical writings, like like the writings of Josephus, or that kind of old ancient writings, historical. But the Bible is completely different. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
revelation.
it starts from truth, and we have a little bit of mixing in it. But the other sources, it starts from zero and has a little bit of truth in it. Right? That's a big distinction.
All right. Does anyone have any other comments about that, or should I move on to a few more verses? For everyone that joined, we read in chapter 3, verse 33 to 351.
So you're up to
Okay.
51 now? You're up to 51?
Up to 51. We're starting at 52 now. So, you want to read these verses? I can load them here. We're starting at 352. Inshallah, we can read through 358. Do we have a volunteer for this?
I just want to add, one thing, the hadith thing is that, we need to treat it like secular writings, like the writings of Josephus, historians, secular writings. That's just, I just wanted to clarify that.
That's a good point.
Erdem, do you want to volunteer to read the verses?
Yeah, sure. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. When Jesus sensed their disbelief, he said, "Who are my supporters towards God?" The disciples said, "We are God's supporters. We believe in God and bear witness that we are submitters. Our Lord, we have believed in what you have sent down, and we have followed the messenger. Count us among the witnesses." The death of Jesus. They plotted and schemed, but so did God, and God is the best schemer. Thus God said, "O Jesus, I am terminating your life, raising you to me, and ridding you of the disbelievers. I will exalt those who follow you above those who disbelieve, till the day of resurrection. Then to me is the ultimate destiny of all of you. Then I will judge among you regarding your disputes. As for those who disbelieve, I will commit them to painful retribution in this world and in the hereafter. They will have no helpers. As for those who believe and lead a righteous life, he will fully recompense them. God does not love the unjust. These are the revelations that we recite to you, providing a message full of wisdom. The footnote in 354-55 says, "We learn that Jesus' soul, the real person, was raised, i.e. Jesus' life on earth was terminated, prior to the arrest, torture, and crucifixion of his empty, soulless, but physiologically living body." See the details in Appendix 22.
Okay, so we just read 352 to 358. Does anyone have any questions or comments about the verses that were read?
I do have a little comment. This is kind of my own understanding, but 355 when it says, it's interesting because it uses specific words. It says, "If qala Allahu ya Isa," like when God said, like something that God actually said to Jesus, and Jesus received like these words. He actually was told this, and my own personal belief is that this is God's reply to when Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Right? Whether you want to say this is before when they were going to arrest him, or whether it was on the cross, or whatever it was. I do think because saying like God literally said this to Jesus, like, and it makes sense that would be a reply to something. I just wanted to make that comment. That's kind of my understanding of it, because the fulfillment of a Psalms prophecy that came thousands of years before, that says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And the end of the prophecy says he will be delivered from the hounds of the dogs, right? And he will be saved. So it's kind of fulfillment, if that makes sense.
I think this is actually an answer to Jesus' prayer in Gethsemane, or it was called Gethsemane, right? In the garden.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there Jesus was praying to God. This was prior to his arrest, so Jesus was praying to God there, and I think this might be God's answer there in the garden Gethsemane. And then
Interesting.
and then he's raised, so then his body is arrested, like the whole.
Because take thy cup from me, or something of that sort. Basically, he doesn't want this to happen to him.
Yeah,
Something else. Yeah.
exactly.
Mm-mm-mm.
Your will be done,
Yeah.
not mine.
Yes, exactly. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, the Garden of Gethsemane was the night before, was it? I think. Or am I forgetting some?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was
I'm
in the
pretty sure it
night.
was the night before, yeah.
So interesting, actually, in the Gospel of Mark, when after the whole thing, like in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night after that, he was like arrested and tortured and crucified, and then in his body. And interesting, in the Gospel of Mark, people come to the ruler there and they say like he died, and he is like, he died already. Like the crucifixion is supposed to be a slow death. Like how did he die so fast?
Exactly. This is such a huge point I always bring up. And like to people who don't believe his physical body was there. It's because that's the whole understanding of Shubbi Halahum, right? Appeared to them as so. Because they thought they killed him through crucifixion, but it was his body, and God already terminated his soul, right? That he didn't die of any bodily injuries. And it's a really important point because the crucifixions usually last. The people, according to the same history, the people that are crucified with him lasted 6 days, 7 days. It's not like that's the usual time you last on a cross or whatever. It takes very long to be crucified, and it's a slow process. But then even like medical historians today can't explain why he was on there for such a short amount of time, and why did they take him off so quickly and all this, right? That can't be explained except by the Quran, which is very interesting to me.
Excellent. So for everyone that just joined, we read the Quran. We read, peace be upon everybody. We read from chapter 3, verse 33, all the way to 3, verse 58. Does anyone have any questions or comments about what was read? I think a lesson here for me in 354 is that people plot and scheme, but so does God, and God is the best schemer. God has the best planner. God is the one that's ultimately going to decide what's going to happen. So, one lesson from this is that in a given life situation, you may assume that things are going in one direction or being dictated by one entity or another. But if you trust in God and remain strong, then you will get a desired outcome. If you maintain righteousness, you will get exactly what you deserve, and that's good. Anyone want to share any questions or comments about those particular verses?
I think it's we didn't talk about the who are my God, who are my supporters to God.
No, we didn't talk about that. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so where was the verse when they sensed the
353.
yeah, 52. It says, when Jesus sensed their disbelief, he said, "Who are my supporters towards God?" The disciples said, "We are God's supporters. We believe in God and bear witness we are submitters." It's this element that you realize, like the focus is God, right? It's not Jesus. They're not there to try to please Jesus. That these were individuals who were committed 100% to God alone. And we have, is it 64? I'm going to jump ahead. It says, "Say, O followers of Scripture, let us come to a logical agreement between us and you. We shall not worship except God, that we never set up any idols besides him, nor set up any human beings as lords beside God. If they turn away, say, we bear witness that we are submitters." I see a connection with that. And then also in the Bible, when Jesus is asked, what's the greatest commandment? It's to love God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul. This was his emphasis, was always the worship of God alone. It's fascinating that people have twisted that to make the focus of Jesus. And then one other just comment is, the word that's used here says, "Who are my supporters?" I believe the Arabic is ansar, right? Which comes from the same root for the Arabic for a Christian, which is nasar. That this connection between these are people who are God supporters, like the real Christians.
Yeah, that's the whole reason they're called Nasara, right? Because they were Ansaru Isa ilallah, right? So they were the supporters of Jesus to God and the supporters of God, right? So very important. That's why they're called Nasara or Nazarenes, however you want to say it.
Does Nazarene have the same root, or is it different?
It's in Hebrew, you use the exact same letters as it would in Arabic.
Does it?
I believe there is a connection there. Yeah, I think God ordained it this way. That Jesus of Nazareth and the
Nazareth, yeah.
Ansar. That's how
Which,
I understand.
if I'm not mistaken, like a Nazarene, where it comes from is one who in essence is committed to the temple. That's like what constitutes someone who's a Nazarene. It's from the Bible. Let me see if I can pull it up.
They're talking about
because the whole
yeah,
because
the full
Nasara in the Hebrew as well, it's the same letters, like to be a Nasara, to give victory, to support, to commit to, those kinds of synonyms. And I do believe there's a connection there why Jesus was from Nazareth and the Nasara, right? Because Jesus was the supporter to God and the people supported him to God. Nasara.
Because wasn't Samson basically a Nazarene as well? If I'm not mistaken.
I don't remember.
Doesn't make I see some.
It's something similar, but it's something in a different context. Like Samson, he took a Nazarite vow, which is something but anyone from Nazareth would be a Nazarene. And then later, after what's it called? People were following Christ because he was a Nazarene, and like they're kind of like they're. For example, if you see in the Bible, it'll talk about ye Galileans, right? There are a bunch of people that are following Christ. You know what I mean? So it's basically the same thing, kind of what you guys were saying about how the word is similar even in the Arabic, right? How it's really just saying that these are followers, basically.
Got it.
The original term comes from the book, actually from the Torah, from Numbers 6, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's what I was
First
looking
mention
at right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me see here. Yeah, the Nazarite vow. Let me just check the Hebrew. But yeah, it is the same like root, the Semitic root. Both of them correlate.
All
What
right,
do you
so
think,
we
Peter? Is that a bit of a stretch, or with the whole Nazareth thing, or what do you think?
I don't think so. I'm curious what Ya Rasul, what your thoughts are.
Sorry, can you repeat that for which point?
Yeah, to the point of like the fact that Jesus was from Nazareth, and this whole point correlates why the Nasara are supposed to be his supporters from Nazareth and all this, and why Jesus was ordained to be from Nazareth.
Listening in. I was kind of just listening in, but I actually kind of like that seemed kind of intuitive, like on hearing again. Like I'm not a Muslim myself, but even just listening in, hearing that you were saying in Arabic, it's kind of the same root word. It seems to make sense, and seems to be like like self-intuitive, like it's probably something like other people wouldn't see it, you know what I mean, not knowing language and stuff, but if you do know the language,
Yeah, the roots from it are the same, even the book of Numbers.
Okay, so now we're in the second half of the session study today. Does anyone have any questions regarding any verse in the Quran or any concepts that they want to ask about?
I just wanted to bring up the point about the birds from clay, and where we find that is in the infancy Gospels of Thomas, which is an apocryphal scripture, and it just proves that the Gospels, as recorded in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they're not all the Gospels. It's not complete because the fact that we have that from the infancy gospel. I'm not saying infancy gospel is more true, but you'll find different parts of the whole story in different places.
And it's actually very important. Actually, the Gospel of John comments on this, and it's very interesting because I think it's at the end of the Gospel of John. I'll get the exact verse right now, but basically the Gospel of John says, and Jesus also did many signs and miracles that were not recorded. Basically, obviously referring to like what John recorded, right? And
Yeah,
this kind of alludes to the fact that there are miracles and things and signs that were not recorded in the four Gospels or the Gospel of John, right? And this doesn't contradict any
yeah,
view.
that's true. The Gospel of John does say that he didn't record everything, even though it is like incredibly vast. Like it has many things that the others don't have. And even that gospel says that.
But
But
Yeah, just John 20 around verse 30. Yeah, that's when he says many signs that weren't recorded.
it's interesting how the Quran has a very concise and to the point confirmation of like many gospels at the same time.
you know, I was going to say that. So the Quran tells us that Jesus knew what people kept in their homes and stuff like that, and you don't find that in the Gospels. And I was thinking also, I I think to myself that the walking on water didn't happen because the Quran doesn't confirm that. That's one of the things that I would limit myself to the miracles that the Quran mentions. What do you think?
Interesting. Yeah, I have thought about that. I'm not sure.
I mean, I don't personally hold that view, but I can see where you're coming from, why you would want to like authorize things that are only in the Quran, right? As a absolute authority, which makes sense.
All right, so we're opening it up to open discussion in regard to topics. Does anyone have any question about the Quran, any verses in the Quran, or any topic in general in relation to any verse or any issue within the religion?
I wanted to make one comment regarding interesting. And so, verse 55, it's intentionally like there's multiple words that God uses for death, predominantly mut and fut. And mat, when it's used, it's very definitive that it's like death. But fut is actually used in the context to complete a mission as well as in the context of death. So when people read 355, they can interpret this as in God is saying that Jesus fulfilled his mission and then he's being raised, that he never actually died. Like that's how they get that interpretation. Or that no, it's like, no, this is the termination of his life, that he fulfilled his mission and then he's being raised. But it's interesting that, God could have changed this one word to the other and would have, resolved the matter, but it's intentional in that sense where it's like he puts enough rope into these verses where if someone wants to, go on some tangent, they have that leeway to do so. And we see it. It says they plotted and schemed in the previous verse. So did God, and God is the best schemer. And that it wasn't just a plot in the scheme at that time. It's like literally from that moment all through history, God intentionally like left things ambiguous, a little open-ended, just for people who, in essence, are searching for a alternative kind of understanding. There's enough there for them to build a scaffolding for that.
I mean, I think the whole point in the Quran makes it very clear that like you shouldn't argue about these intricate matters. When exactly was the soul taken? When was this? When was that? How did this do that? And these intricate matters, it's all assumption. God says يَتَّبِعُونَ الظَّنَّ. They follow assumption. Like, and they follow assumptions of what they dispute. And all we need to do is confirm, like وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ, like, and إِنِّي مُتَوَفِّيكَ, like these are the muhkam stuff, right? But all the intricate stuff, you cannot be decisive about it. And that's what God's saying. It's all has to do with assumption.
However, from our perspective, from a submitter perspective, though, I mean, we have an appendix that pretty much clarifies it precisely. And I mean, so for me, I don't feel the problem. I don't feel like I'm speculating, trying to understand anything deeper than precisely what the messenger told us in an appendix about this topic. And he brought proofs regarding that too. So I don't know. That'll be just the difference between somebody who accepts Dr. Khalifa's message and those who don't.
I mean, even with that point of view as well, there is still things you shouldn't even be bickering about, like where was he taken here, when was he taken there, how did they not notice that he was dead, how did they not do this, right? These little details, like
Minutia.
Yeah.
we can't be given like a
Yeah.
complete perfect story, right? We just know what we need to know basically about Jesus.
We
That's
we
how I
do
feel.
that all the time, don't we? With that.
Mm-mm.
I put a verse that I always like reflect back to. It's 45:17 says, "We have given them herein clear commandments. Ironically, they did not dispute until after the knowledge had come to them. This is due to jealousy and on their part. Surely your Lord will judge them on the day of resurrection regarding everything they have disputed." It's funny, you would think giving someone information would resolve the differences. It actually builds on the content that people have for one another. We were talking before the study regarding the Protestant Reformation, and so when Martin Luther translated the Bible in the common from basically Latin to which one the common German vernacular, his thought was that, oh, this is going to unify people; they'll be able to understand it for themselves, and then it's going to bring people closer. The irony was that once he did that, it literally created thousands and thousands of sects of Christianity. That when God gives us more knowledge, rather than unifying, it's like it just gives us more things to bicker and complain about. Because if let's say the Quran consisted of simply believe in God, there's one God, believe in the hereafter, and lead a righteous life. If that was it, like let's say that encompassed the entire Quran, there's very little we could argue about. But it's because there's more information and more details. It's like the landscape to find things to bicker and argue about increases with more information that's given.
That's funny.
Peter, can I that actually I talked about that another time about Jordan Peterson actually points that out, that when he's looking at the examination of ethics, and that he just sees that it's a prioritization of information, and that the source of the information, a society needs to agree on the ultimate source of what our information is. I mean, once you start doing that, then we disassemble any commonality we have. And so the right and wrong can no longer be determined. And this is in reference to maybe some of this, even what a man and what a woman is, or what sexes are,
Right.
these kinds of things, that we deconstruct everything. And so from that perspective, I think to myself, okay, well, the Bible was the collective source. It's the source of all source of literature, of knowledge. It would go back to the oldest one, which was the Bible. But from my perspective, it seems that the Quran has now replaced that the Quran is a substitute, and now God has that as the ultimate source. But I would even go one step further, that actually he sent a messenger to clarify it and gave an English translation of that to even narrow it down to give us less ambiguity, in my view. I'd just like to hear somebody else's thoughts on that.
So think of this, right? When before the translation by Rashad Khalifa, right? You have these various sects of Islam, but they're a handful, right? Basically, you could break it down to Sunni and Shia, and then within each one, they have their different kind of like ideologies, but they're roughly two. What happened after Rashad translated this Quran is now you have basically the whole Quranic movement. You have, literally thousands and thousands and thousands of permutations of understandings of the Quran. So when you, in essence, reduce the scope of knowledge, it's easier to keep people in line. It's when you expand the scope of knowledge and information that you get fragmentation. So consider in the past, like, CNN used to be the only global news, 24-hour news source, right? And then they would disseminate that information to the local news station. So everyone was working roughly off the same information. Be it right, be it wrong, we were all looking at the same kind of content and then coming to agreements or disagreements based on that. Today, we have such an abundance of information that literally, like, two people, it's not that they're assessing the facts differently, they're literally looking at completely different facts that the other side hasn't seen. This creates more and more division and fracture within a society. It's like, we only have a limited capacity of the amount of information we can process. As we're given more and more, it's like the what we end up looking at between two people becomes more and more distant.
Yeah, that's a very good point about we see it in real time how that's happened, and that's why. And so my point about so God sending a messenger to give us clarification, clarify certain understandings. To me, it seems like we're to go to him to judge in our disputes. We go to the messenger. What did the messenger think about these things? I think it's the only path towards unification, because actually
I
that's
agree.
kind of the principle that's behind this for me, is like,
Yeah,
how
I
do we
agree.
achieve
Oh, sorry. I agree with you, Jeff, and I appreciate you. A couple weeks ago, you didn't even know Jordan Peterson was. Now, mashallah, you're top Jordan Peterson expert by God's leave. This is wonderful. I would say he's one of the closest people to submission that I know of. His concepts are very consistent with the Quran. But in regard to your point, I totally agree with you. We just released a graphic. I don't know if you've seen this, Jeff, or not. It's the 5 levels of Quranism that we have established roughly so far. Obviously, there's more variations, but I've identified 5 levels of Quranism. And I agree with you that a clarifying, purifying, and consolidating messenger is necessary to basically solidify, our beliefs. I'm not saying that you're going to agree with me, for example, on the contents of the sanctuary of Mary, but for 95 to 99% of the issues, including all rites, rituals, worships, practices, for the vast majority of them, we should be totally aligned using this formula. And I think that's kind of the function of a messenger in that way. Otherwise, it's going to just defeat the whole purpose of us having, wanting to have any form of unity or congregation or whatsoever. And I've said this before, I feel like I'm more connected with some, Sunnis than I am with, some Quranists in particular. But there's a concept of unity in the Quran. God says he loves those who are united like bricks in one wall. God says he loves when we fight together, united in his cause. And so we should strive to find ways to do this. Obviously, a messenger would be an efficient, effective way to get to that particular point.
right? Yeah. So what's key in understanding that is, like, what are the first principles by which we organize our lives? And this is going into the understanding of ethics. And so the first principles, we would have to say, well, that comes from the Quran, but then, and then furthermore, and like I just said, furthermore, distilled through God's messenger, where the disputes are all of these different tangents that we can go on. It can be clarified more if we follow a messenger. It seems like the logical solution to this fragmentation from more information.
Okay, does anyone have any questions or comments in terms of Quranic topics that we want to discuss now, or any verse that anyone's been pondering on? Because now's the time. We're in the formal Quran study, and I wanted to ask everyone to sign up for next week's Quran study so we can see the number of people that are potentially interested. It's not a contract. You're not going to be penalized if you don't show up, but if you express interest, we get a rough idea of kind of what we're dealing with, and it helps the server in that way. So if you could tap interested on that. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
There was a question that Caldwell put regarding the John 20:30. So the verse was just specified that the Gospels didn't contain all the miracles that Jesus performed, and the expected pointed to this verse. So I just pasted that. Regarding if I believe this, I do believe that Jesus was the Messiah. This is what's specified in the Quran as well. And this is actually the word Christoph, if I'm not mistaken, is the Greek for the word Mishnah, which comes from Messiah, if I'm not mistaken, in that origin.
Yeah, it all goes back to origin of all of his Mashiach, which is like the Hebrew equivalent of Masih, which means to wipe and all that. And basically, it was basically a Hebrew saying for anointment, because the way they would anoint people, the Israelites, they would do the wiping of the oil as some sort of ritual for anointment, basically. That's why a wiped one would be an anointed one, right? Think of it similar to like how you see in the movies or shows how a king is sitting on his throne, and he puts the sword like on his knight's right shoulder and left shoulder, some kind of anointing process. It's in that kind of regard. But
We
yeah,
had
it's
a
just yeah.
just the so-called words is what did he save them from? What we were reading today is just the fact that the preaching that Jesus provided was the absolute devotion and worship of God alone. But then what happened over time is that the focus shifted away from God towards Jesus. And we see this like consistently with the same thing happened in Islam with Muhammad, where the focus was originally always God alone. And then later on, people start emphasizing the human factor um, over that of God.
Mm-hmm. And Claude, what's important, like Jesus had many messages. I mean, for one of the main messages was he was preaching the kingdom of, he was preaching the coming of the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God, right? Another one of his main messages is the showing God's salvation, right? His whole point, this is my understanding of my belief, that his whole why he's named called Yeshua in the first, like as his name is first mentioned in a prophecy in the Psalms. It talks about being delivered and being saved from the hounds of the dogs. Is that the whole story of the crucifixion is showing God's salvation and how he will be saved from something, right?